It is a pleasure to welcome you to the panel session about enhancement, organized by the Center for the Promotion of Science and Center for the Study of Bioethics. Let me introduce our participants, leading expert in bioethics, Professor John Harris, University of Manchester, Professor Julian Savulescu, Center for Neuroethics, Oxford University, and Professor Vojin Rakic, Center for the Study of Bioethics, Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, University of Belgrade. Thank you all for coming. Before we start the discussion, Aleksandra Drecun, the Director of the Center for the Promotion of Science, would like to welcome you.
Good evening, everyone. I will start also in English because we decided that the most convenient for all of us, since we have here a distinguished guest, and we do not want to lose anything in translation. And just to add something on top of what Mr. Ziegler, who was the last speaker in the small video clip, said, we hope that the others will follow. Because we are honored and privileged to have here today the most distinguished thinkers and people who are looking far forward and who are possibly giving some questions and even some answers to the issues that concern most of us. There is a conference being held in Belgrade these days on bioethics, and we are grateful to Professor Vojin Rakic, who helped us organize also this public debate and who has given us an opportunity to ask those who have some more information or who have been thinking a little bit more than all of us about the issues of bioethics. And just another word, we are here in the place where we celebrate this month, the math. This is the month of mathematics, national manifestation organized by the Center of the Promotion of Science. And I hope that during this talk and during the discussion, we'll possibly get some answers on whether we can improve and enhance our capabilities in doing math, in computing, in perhaps also being competitors in some world competitions in math, because we have here some young people that are enthusiasts, that are very capable, and maybe one day that is also going to be a question. Who is the most knowledgeable and who has been helped and how somebody has been helped. So this is just a question in advance to give you some ideas on what might be also a question for people that are math enthusiasts. So we are very grateful to have you here and thankful to Professor Rakic and to Dubravka that have, since they've convened this gathering tonight. Thank you all, and take notes, think of the questions. This is the essence of this gathering today. I hope we'll all enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Professor Rakic will say a few welcome words.
Good evening and welcome. The Center for the Study of Bioethics and the Oxford Center for Neuroethics, headed by Professor Julian Savulescu, we decided to organize this conference, Enhancement, Cognitive, Moral, and Mood. And this decision we made months ago, and after that it was a significant effort to organize all this. The conference assembles really the best bioethicists and philosophers in the world, I would say, with a few exceptions perhaps. John Harris and Julian Savulescu are leading two, I would almost say, schools with quite different views on the issue of enhancement, which is the theme of the conference. The conference is co-organized by the Center for the Promotion of Science, and hereby I would like to thank Aleksandra Drecun for organizing this event this evening. And I would like to cite Professor Savulescu, also he is present here, but if he forgets to say what he said yesterday, I would like to cite him right away now that this event, this conference, is the most important conference in the world in 2013 on the most important theme in science. Or if I'm wrong in my citation, I would like to be corrected. So, welcome.
Thank you, Professor. One of the most prominent topics in bioethics is human enhancement. There is nothing wrong in our need to improve ourselves, and there is nothing disputable in the aspiration to enhance someone's cognitive abilities. The thesis about cognitive enhancement becomes debatable when it is assumed that means leading to it may be biomedical and that it is morally justified to use them for non-medical purposes. Furthermore, the relationship between cognitive and moral enhancement is a specific issue, and it raises many questions. Professor Harris, please explain us in a nutshell, what is enhancement?
Well, we all possess many powers and capacities. I'm using many of those powers now. I'm using the power of speech. I can see you. If you talk to me, I can hear you. These are the powers and capacities that all most human beings have. All of us hope to have them. Now, we can improve these in various ways. See a lady in the front row who's improving her sight by wearing spectacles. That is an enhancement technology. It improves sight. In the room outside, there are microscopes. If you look down them, you get a magnification far beyond that available to a pair of spectacles. That, again, enhances your sight. So enhancement is a general name we use for improving upon all of the powers and capacities that we humans have or might potentially have. But this also includes other important powers and capacities, like our ability to resist infection or to resist disease, or indeed to augment those powers beyond the normal so that we can become, hopefully, stronger, more intelligent, with greater musical ability, not only than other people who are our contemporaries, but other human beings who have ever lived. So this is the general name we give to the endeavor to improve our lives by improving on the powers and capacities that we possess. And I'm very fond of saying that if it wasn't good for you, it wouldn't be an enhancement. So obviously one of the constraints, one of the things beyond which we will not go, we will not recommend things that will not be good for you. So it is, if you like, a truth that you can't, there's a saying in English, you can't have too much of a good thing. Because if you have too much of it, it ceases to be a good thing. So you enjoy eating, but if you eat too much, you get too fat, it ceases to be a good thing. It doesn't mean eating is bad, it means that you can do it to excess. So whatever the improvements we try to make to powers and capacities, when those improvements cease to be good for us, then they cease to be enhancements. So we're talking about those improvements that we would like to have and that would make our lives better and more successful.
Thank you. Professor Savalasko, a question for you. What is moral enhancement?
So, as John said, we can enhance many aspects of our lives. So we can live much longer than humans ever before us. We can have greater powers of thinking and abilities to solve problems through the use of computing and the internet, but increasingly through the use of drugs that will initially be for treating Alzheimer's disease. We can enhance our mood through alcohol or other drugs, antidepressants. We can enhance our relationships, our powers within a marital relationship. But we can also enhance our moral behaviour. As human animals, one of the most important behaviours that we share with other mammals are ways of organising ourselves and cooperating with each other and not harming members of our group. And all human beings have these capacities, but to varying degrees. We are living in a very exciting time, probably the most exciting and also dangerous time, because our powers through technology are ever increasing. Not only have we split the atom and created nuclear power, we've sequenced the human genome. Human cloning is all but possible. But we are also starting to understand the science of morality, what makes people different, why some people commit crime and others don't, why some people are more empathetic or sympathetic and others are less, and why some people are altruistic and some people are selfish. Now, this is not to say that moral behaviour is in our genes or in our nature. It's to say that our nature can influence this, just as the world in which we live influences us. And science is giving us also the capacity to change this biological part, this internal part. Just as we can change our way we think and feel, we can also change how we morally behave towards each other. And this, I think, is a very exciting prospect that I think there are very strong reasons to research further.
Thank you. So now I would like to hear the opinions on the following matter of
I just wanted to say, I forgot to say one thing. You asked about mathematics, and I think this is a very, very useful instruction of human enhancement. I'll tell you two things to enhance your mathematical abilities. One, you can vastly increase your memory capacity through what are called memory arts. And these were known to the ancient Greeks. And if you practice these, you can remember vast amounts of information, complex theorems and so on. But more recently, in Oxford, Roy Cohen-Kadosh has shown that electrical stimulation, a very light electrical stimulation of certain areas of the brain, can increase your ability to learn mathematical skills and develop numeracy. So this is a very nice example of how we can fundamentally change what the sort of capacity all of us have to differing degrees through the use of science and technology.
Thank
But
you.
don't go out and do it. It can be dangerous. But
You're talking about transcranial
electrical stimulation.
electrical stimulation. So, do you think there is a danger of unnatural interventions on human nature? Because a recent article by Aga, published in Journal of Medical Ethics, has warned us that there might be a possibility of creating post-humans. So, Professor Harris.
Well, I think we should be very clear that nature is morally indifferent. It can be good, it can be bad. What's natural is neither necessarily good nor bad. We would not practice medicine if we didn't believe in attempting to frustrate the course of nature. People naturally fall ill. They are naturally attacked by viruses or by bacteria. If we only did what was natural, we would not practice medicine, we would not do science, we would not do a whole range of things. So there is no magic in what's natural or unnatural. What we have to do is to decide between those things which are natural, if you can define those, and those that are unnatural, we need to decide which are good for us and which are bad for us and which are useful and which are threatening. That is the only issue, in my view. And I think Julian and I don't disagree about that.
Yeah, in many cases, people think that natural influences act mysteriously or naturally, but they change your biology. So to give an example, you can perform better in sport by training at altitude because you reduce the amount of oxygen in the air and your body produces more red blood cells and you have a competitive advantage. Now that's natural, it's completely legal in sport. You can do exactly the same thing by donating some of your blood now and in 3 months' time when your body has replenished that, having that blood transfused back. Both of them increase the number of red cells. One is natural, the other is said to be unnatural, but both of them have exactly the same effects. And to think that natural influences are somehow different from unnatural ones is a deep mistake, because everything is we are a part of nature, and what we construct is a part of nature. When you learn something, when you learn a skill, like riding a bike or playing the piano, your brain changes, and it changes irreversibly. Just as if you gave the person a drug or changed the structure of the brain intentionally and directly. So I think it's this distinction between natural and artificial is very deep in people's psychology, because as animals we like to have green around us. We like to have abundant nature for our survival. So we're programmed to have this response, this positive response to nature. Sorry, but I think it's not. We need to go further than that now and ask other questions.
Just to give you one more example, Julia's given some very good examples, but one of my favorites is something that we're all benefiting from at this moment. It's completely unnatural, it's synthetic. It's synthetic sunshine. Before we had synthetic sunshine, we humans used to go to sleep when it got dark and could get up and work when the sun came up. But with the advent of synthetic sunshine, firelight, candlelight, electric light, our lives changed. We could work and play through the hours of darkness, and it is a huge benefit. In this room, there are no windows, I think. We are bathed in synthetic sunshine. But I hope nobody thinks that this is a disaster.
It's quite bright, though. It's sort of getting in my eyes.
I'm sorry, Julian.
Professor Rakic?
Yeah, I would like to say something that will strike the chord with the audience here, the Serbian population. Perhaps I would like to say, building on what John Harris said, that nature is morally indifferent. Tornadoes, earthquakes. I don't think we're happy to have an earthquake, but it's completely natural, an earthquake. But something that will, as I said, strike a chord here. People frequently say, okay, I will take that medicine because that is natural. Many things are natural which I wouldn't use as a medicine. Poisonous, snake poison, for instance. There's many examples to give of things in nature that are, heroin is also a natural thing, right? So if you say, okay, I'm using a medicine that is natural, that is great, but if that medicine is snake poison or heroin, it wouldn't necessarily be the best medicine that you can use. So completely morally indifferent nature.
The whole of human history has been about trying to change the world around, nature, to make our lives better. Agriculture, farming animals, building dams, building shelters, clearing land, and so on. Now we have the ability to change not just the external world, but ourselves to have better lives. This was done, as John said, through medicine, but now we can change other things that aren't diseases, but that affect how well our lives will go. And that, I think, raises very important opportunities, but also difficult questions.
Thank you all. So my next question is for Professor Savulescu. We all know that the pace of scientific change is exponential, but has our moral managed to keep up? So should moral enhancement be compulsory or facultative?
So if you're a scientist and you study the human animal, not some idealization or some romantic version of what human beings are like, if you study human behaviour, we are essentially the same sort of animal as we were 200,000 years ago. Our bodies haven't changed in that time, and indeed our minds have not changed in that time. We have the same sorts of dispositions, the same sorts of character as our original hunter-gatherer ancestors. But in the last 10,000 years, our society has radically changed with farming and the ability to domesticate animals and create complex cities. In the last 100 years, 200 years, we've had the Industrial Revolution and the Information Revolution, the Genetic Revolution, the nanotechnology revolution. We've had so many revolutions in technology that the world is completely different. So we still have the sets of dispositions in terms of our character, but our world is completely different. So what is it like really to be a human being anywhere in the world, whether you're Serbian or African or American? You have a basic, what's called moral psychology, a set of ways in which you behave with people. And that's characterised by a disposition towards violence, especially towards other people, care about people, but your family and friends and the people in your small community, your group of 150. You saw the consequences of this kind of concern for people who were like you in your group when the Yugoslavia broke down. And we can cooperate, but in a limited way with people when they see us and at one time. But the world today gives people not just automatic weapons, it gives them biological weapons. Within a decade, you'll be able to create the most powerful biological weapons like smallpox in a backyard laboratory. Now, it only takes 1 out of 7 billion people to decide, instead of shooting 100 people with an automatic rifle, that they will do this. So we have a power that we've never had before, and we don't have the moral qualities to deal with that sort of power. We also won't be able to deal with things like climate change or global poverty and inequality, because we're not set up psychologically to deal with these sorts of problems. We don't think about the distant future. We don't think about people in a faraway place. We can't empathise with large numbers of people, only with single individuals. That's our nature. So we're not morally set up for the challenges of what are called collective action problems like climate change or global poverty, or with the threat of mass violence. So because of this and our understanding of the ways in which you could influence those, not just by having surveillance or more police force, but by changing people, I believe that we have a very strong imperative to investigate how we can use this science, not just to make people live longer, be smarter, but also be less prone to this kind of mass violence, more altruistic, more empathetic, more cooperative, greater sense of justice. Now, should it be compulsory? The easiest thing is to make any new technology or power voluntary, because if you let people choose for themselves, if they choose it, it's because they think it's better for themselves, or better that they should do it. And that, I think, is a very useful strategy. This is done when paedophiles are offered castration, chemical castration, which is a crude form of moral enhancement to reduce their sex drive as a way of getting earlier parole. They make the choice. They can stay in jail, or they can have this moral enhancement. And I think that is something that most people would think is an option that should be offered to people. But if the intervention is very effective and very safe and uncontroversially good, we should do it compulsorily. Here's an example: education. Education is given to everyone because it's an enhancement that is clearly good for people and good for society. It's also a form of moral education where values are instilled in children. Now, if this transcranial electrical stimulation that I discussed before not only helps you to learn mathematics better, but if it helps you to learn the sorts of moral skills and qualities that we want in our children, if it enhances that, it may be a real question whether this is treated as just as education is, and indeed as a part of education.
Professor Harris, you're skeptical about the value and methodologies of moral enhancement. You said, "My own belief is that the most reliable and the most effective method of moral enhancement, both for now and for the foreseeable future, is in fact the enhancement of our cognitive and intellectual powers."
I did say that. and also our powers of telecommunication as well, which are being well used in the front row.
We have music.
So far, I agree with almost everything that my colleague Julian Savulescu has said. I agree about the dangers we face. I agree that we need to bring our moral consciousness as well as our physiology, as it were, up to date with the increasing power that we are able to exercise over the world and over one another. So far, we're in agreement. And I also agree with him that that if we can do it safely and effectively, then there may be good reasons to make it compulsory. And I agree with the analogy that he used with education. Your country, I imagine, like mine, has compulsory education up to a certain age. We do that for a number of reasons. One, because we want our children to benefit from education, to understand the world better, to be able to function better, to indeed be enhanced by the education that they receive. But we also do it to protect them and to enable them to provide for their futures, and increasingly, this is important to me, for my future. I'm increasingly dependent on the young for lots of things that I need. So far, we are in agreement. Now, the issue is over safety and efficacy. At the moment, the sorts of interventions that are available which seem to affect things relevant to our moral nature, to our goodness and badness, to our wickedness or indeed our lack of wickedness, are very simple, and they are very simple attitudes. They're sometimes called pro-social attitudes. They're the sort of attitudes that enabled our very distant ancestors to start cooperating with one another and in a rudimentary way, in a simple way, caring about one another. So our pro-social attitudes are the ones that make us want to help our fellow creatures, usually our own species, often much more local than that, our own families first, and possibly then those in our own village, and then possibly those in our own society. Now that's great, but I don't think it is actually the chief need of the contemporary world. We now live in a global village. It is not enough to improve the sympathy, the empathy, the caring behavior that we offer to our friends and neighbors, to our families, and our workmates. We need more imagination, more awareness of how to generalize those very important feelings of sympathy, empathy, and cooperation, not only across whole nation states and continents, but right across the world, because our safety depends on everybody's safety. Now, I am concerned that the sorts of interventions that we currently have available are likely to increase my willingness. If somebody were to fall down in front of me now in pain, they might increase my willingness to rush and help you. But they might decrease my awareness that actually, although you seem to be in some pain, it's not very serious. And there may be people in greater need who I can't see. And if I'm thinking about how to deploy those extra resources that societies have to deploy for caring for others, I might be better advised to deploy them elsewhere in Serbia, or elsewhere in Europe, or elsewhere in the world. So what worries me is that we will increase our capacity and our willingness to help those near to us at the expense of those further away. And it seems to me that what we need in the global village that we now all inhabit is the power and the willingness to generalize our affections and our concern for others right across the planet, right across the globe. And So we are beginning now, I think we've been pretty much in agreement up to this point in the evening, but we're beginning now to reveal not a difference in about what matters, but a difference in whether or not the ways that are currently available to improve elements of what we might think of as our morality are likely to work. Take a different thing. We've talked about sympathy and empathy. Take something like violence. It's generally felt that we are too violent a species, and that may be right. And other drugs are available which decrease our propensity for violence, which sounds like a good thing. But sometimes we need violence to defend ourselves and to defend those that we care about.
So, Professor, sorry, if, for example, mother kills a person trying to attack her child in order to save her baby's life, this kind of murder would be justified.
I think we would all think that that was justified, and I don't want to decrease your capacity as a mother or a potential mother to protect your children by making you incapable of the level of anger and resentment against threats posed to them that you might need to protect them. So I think we need a mixed bag of dispositions. We need violence as well as lots of other things.
I think there's a very important point here, and that is that these issues that John is raising are unavoidable, that we have to face them. So take his example of empathy. The fact is that we all differ in how empathetic we are. And indeed in the United States, and I think it's probably the same in Serbia, empathy in the last 30 years, amongst college students anyway, has been declining, particularly in the last 10 years. So you have to ask, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And is the current level that we have too high or too low? So, if it's the case that empathy is actually, we have too much of it, or too much of it is a bad thing, we have to ask, maybe we should reduce it. So we have to address these questions because A, we all differ, and B, these sorts of properties change, and C, we're increasingly able to make changes ourselves. And as John agreed, evolution and nature don't deliver up the right solutions to our problems. We can't just say, oh, let's just let nature sort it out, because it's very likely that nature hasn't selected the right distribution of psychopaths in the population. There's 1% of people are psychopaths, that this is somehow ideal for the sort of world that we're living in today. This is just an artifact of the way in which we evolved. So we have to ask, maybe we need more, maybe we need less.
How many psychopaths do we need?
Well, I think we need none. But, people have given this argument, well, psychopaths in a form can be leaders of big businesses and so on, and they are often the hard-headed individuals, but then when you look at the data, in fact, they often ruin businesses. So you can answer this question, is it good for society to have psychopaths or not, by doing scientific research, just as you can look at what level of empathy is best going to deal with the problems that we agree we face.
Thank you. Now, I'm sure that we are all aware of the gap between what we believe to be right and how we act. How can we ensure that even if we undergo moral enhancement, we will act upon knowing what is right? What can bridge that gap? Professor Rakic?
Yes, actually that is something with which we can build on the previous conversation we had here between John and Julian. So we can indeed be sure that not our reasoning will be improved by bioenhancement in this case, so the gap between what we believe is right to do and what we in fact do, but the problem of motivation, and that is what that aspect of what we actually do, can indeed be influenced. Our motivation can be improved by bioenhancement. So medicines can help us motivate ourselves to act more in line with what we believe is right. So that is a very, very important element in a moral bioenhancement, and that is why I favor it in this sense. Or, for instance, it can even cognitively enhance us because our judgment might be colored by, for instance, racism. We might feel disgust towards people who are of a different race. If by moral bioenhancement we get rid of this disgust we feel, our cognition will be improved in the sense that we will reason more clearly and more appropriately about this matter. So in that regard, I'm very much in favor of moral bioenhancement. When the question about the voluntariness of moral bioenhancement, it is a matter of degree. If the danger of self-annihilation of humanity, as Julian was told, is enormous, then we might opt for losing some of our freedom. Personally, I like freedom a lot. So I would rather run the risk of this self-annihilation of humanity, or what Julian and Ingmar Persson call ultimate harm, if that danger is not enormous. Some of that danger is, for me, acceptable or not a sufficient reason to sacrifice my freedom and undergo compulsory moral enhancement. But again, it's partially an individual matter, psychological matter, and partially really a matter of degree. So
I think it's important to realize that we already do moral enhancement in lots of different ways. And in fact, one of my PhD students, Sylvia Turbeck, showed that the common drug propranolol used to treat high blood pressure reduces racism. But here's a very common example of a moral enhancement that is performed on children to increase their motivation, and that is the use of drugs like Ritalin for attention deficit disorder. Now, one of the worst things you can have as a human being is an inability to control your impulses and to delay your gratification until later so that you act impulsively. This leads you to be violent, it leads you to have great difficulty learning, making friends, and you end up at the very bottom of the socio-economic scale. Now, attention deficit disorder is such a disorder of self-control. When Ritalin is given to children, it's in part to increase their ability to control these impulses and increase their motivational strength to do what they know is the right thing to do. And it's in part to stop those children being violent to other children, as well as for their own good. So this is a very common drug that's used already that is partly a moral enhancer.
But Professor...
Sorry, can I just comment on,
Yeah, go ahead.
that? Because I hate to have too much agreement, because it's not nearly as much fun as disagreement. But again, I agree with Julian, particularly about Ritalin. Ritalin is also a very powerful cognitive enhancer. It helps these same children who not only have problems with the focusing of their attention and with their restlessness and the sorts of symptoms that Julian has described, but they also do poorly at school for those reasons. They can't concentrate, they can't organize themselves, they often find difficulty with their handwriting and a range of other skills as well. Now, Ritalin improves all of those things, and it improves their capacity to succeed at school greatly, up to about 10%. That's a big improvement. So again, I'm in favor of the use of Ritalin. For me, its more important use is as a cognitive enhancer, because it enables kids to benefit from going to school much more. They succeed, they're happier as a result of that. So it has very many good effects. And it also improves another range of capacities, which we're going to need to face the dangers that Julian's talked about. And that is the dangers, the really big dangers, what he calls the ultimate dangers that face us, things like global warming, things like the risk of chemical and biological warfare, things like the risk of new infectious diseases, which are always arising in nature. Nature is probably the biggest bioterrorist that we face. And so we're going to need to improve our cognitive skills, and Ritalin is one of the drugs that will help us to do that. But this raises an issue that we do disagree about, and it's very well worth discussing. Julian has said on a number of occasions that because science and technology are so rapidly advancing, and one set of things that science and technology are producing are dangers, the capacity, for example, to engineer drugs that haven't been communicable by aerosol, that is, in a way you can just breathe in. So 2 groups in the last 18 months, one in America and one in the Netherlands, in Holland, have changed the H5N1 strain of bird flu so that it is communicable, whereas formerly it was only communicable by contact with infected birds. They have engineered this so that it is communicable just by breathing the air that these birds have breathed. Now, the scientists did this because they realized that this form of flu might mutate in nature and present this danger. But the problem was, of course, that once you've learned how to engineer this change in the laboratory, then terrorists could do this in their back room and make a terribly powerful weapon for widespread terror. Now, Julian is worried, and I am too, that science is increasing the capacity for evil people to do harm by creating new diseases in their kitchens, if you like, and spreading them. And he wants to put a brake on scientific development until moral enhancement, moral improvement, is sufficiently widespread for us to be confident that we can let loose the scientists in the laboratories again. Now, this worries me greatly because I look to science to solve many of the dangers that face us at the moment. I look to science not only to help us with new communicable diseases, but to produce better moral enhancers than we have at the moment. I don't think we can put the brakes on science until we have universal moral enhancement. I know you want to interrupt me there. May I have one more sentence, do you think? Or
Okay, one more.
I'm very fond of saying this because I believe it to be true. It is a speculation about the future, and it is only as true as speculations about the future can be, but I believe it's pretty certainly true. In the future, there will be no more planet Earth, and in the future, there will be no more human beings. But we don't need to worry about either of those two things if we're careful. There won't be any more human beings because I believe we will have further evolved into creatures very like us, but sufficiently different to constitute a new species. And when our sun dies in about 5 billion years from now, a long time, you may think it won't bother you very much. We may hope that us or our successors, these new species who will be like us, but hopefully better than us, more intelligent, more resilient, more able to cope with the new world that will exist then, they will either have to find a new planet for us to live on, or they will have to develop the technology that will enable them to construct such a planet for themselves. It's a long time in the future, but we're going to face it. And I believe that the best insurance policy we have against these ultimate dangers, as Julian calls them, is the acceleration of science, not the retardation of science. And I believe the only way we will achieve that is if we can improve our cognitive powers, our powers of thought. So I think our salvation lies in beefing up cognitive enhancement and not worrying too much about moral enhancement, because it's the cognitive enhancement that will help us produce the science that will help us better to confront the dangers that we face. Thank you for your indulgence.
So that was one sentence, okay.
Well, I specialize in long sentences.
So we came to a conclusion that scientific progress is both the means of our salvation as well as the means of our downfall. So, Professor Savulescu, please tell us something about the God machine and describe us this thought experiment.
Well, as Voyen has already raised and John has raised, some of these interventions to make people more moral, to make them better people, may affect their freedom. So some of you will have seen the film A Clockwork Orange, which was a very famous depiction of trying to stop violence through a form of essentially brainwashing or conditioning. Surgery was performed in the 1950s and 60s to stop people behaving immorally. Now, many people think of these with great horror, and I do too. And it's possible that some kinds of enhancements won't raise these sorts of issues. So, for example, if you make people more empathetic, for example, you don't reduce their freedom, you just make them more like the people who are already empathetic, who are presumably as free as anyone. Women are less violent and more empathetic. So if you made men more like women, as in part you do with paedophilia when you offer hormonal castration, you don't reduce people's freedom because women are clearly as free as men. So these sorts of interventions won't affect people's freedom. But the sorts of things that may be most powerful, so for example, if you had a greater understanding of psychopathy and were able to rewire the brain so that people thought in different ways or behaved in different ways, this would be something that removes people's freedom. But so does imprisonment. So does surveillance cameras. So does wearing a seatbelt. There are many things in society that restrict our freedom to stop us harming other people, or even in some cases ourselves. The God machine was an extreme example of this, that science fiction example, that imagine that we were able to construct in 2045 a supercomputer that was able to get information from all around the world and was also able to read people's minds. And if they formed the desire to kill someone or commit a very violent crime, the machine would immediately intervene and change their mind. So they just thought they changed their mind, but in fact it was this machine that was intervening to stop murder, for example. Now, this would remove people's freedom. This would reduce people's freedom. In my view, it might be worth it, because most of us would never form that intention, so our lives would go exactly as they go today. And for those people who did form the intention to murder, they will have a victim, and they will also end up in prison for the rest of their life or executed in the United States. And this change of intention is better than those sorts of things. So in some cases, moral enhancement may restrict freedom, but I think it's an open question whether that price is worth paying.
Professor Harris, do you think that God machine is the ultimate solution, or it would be an act of selling ourselves into slavery?
Well, I do think it would be an extreme folly if we could produce a God machine to do so, for a number of reasons. The first is its catastrophic effect on freedom. This machine is going to be able, it's a science fiction example, it may never be possible, but we have to suppose that it would be, and then the question is, would we want this machine to rule all of our lives or not? Now, what it does is it detects when you have a murderous thought, let us say, and it changes your mind for you, so that you no longer have that thought. You decide not to murder the person you were about to murder, and that's allegedly a moral improvement. Now, there are two problems with this. The first is that it clearly takes away our freedom. And my own view, it would take quite a long time to explain it fully, but my own view is that freedom consists of the freedom not only to make mistakes, but actually to do wrong.
So without the freedom to fall, good cannot be a
there's
choice.
a wonderful, yes, the freedom to fall is a lovely phrase that I get from an English late Elizabethan poet, John Milton, in his famous poem, Paradise Lost. And he imagines God talking to man and saying, I made you sufficient to have stood, that is sufficient, able to make up your own mind, but free to fall. Sufficient to stand, but free to fall. And that is, as it were, a description of the alleged condition in which God made human beings. And the sufficiency to stand, the ability to make up our own mind, is the mirror image, if you like, of the freedom to fall. It's not your own mind if you can't make it up and carry through that resolution. So I think this machine would be the end of freedom. But I have another problem with this machine. And that is, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the very primitive nature of these dispositions that moral enhancement might operate on. You used the example, or adapted my example, of you rescuing let us say, your daughter from a murderer, from somebody who was going to murder her or rape her by killing him. Now, and so you intended to murder him, you intended to kill him. Now, how would the God machine differentiate?
No, we would see the circumstance.
Between...
We would see who the attacker is.
So the machine will have a possibility and accessibility to context.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that it has perfect information about the world and your mental states. So it's not just reading your mental states. It's looking at, it sees somebody about to murder this child. It's able to interpret those actions. And it would change the murderer's mind and your mind. I mean, it's important to think about this. So say we're all obsessed rightly with terrorism. Now, if we have extremely effective anti-terrorist programs that constantly thwarted terrorism, it seems little different to me to be able to use such a machine to pick up and change the intentions of terrorists. I don't think the freedom to commit terrorist acts is a freedom worth protecting. Freedom without value is meaningless.
I'm delighted that Julian is so confident about his own inventions, whether they're inventions of the imagination.
It's a philosophical discussion.
Or of anything else. But I am deeply skeptical in having that degree of faith in machinery on which we would rely for the protection of our children, on which we would rely to allow us sufficient freedom to create our own lives.
Look, I'll give you another example. We are dependent on machines all the time. We're actually going to create driverless cars. They will be safer
and more
effective than human drivers.
I certainly am not.
That will take away your freedom to drive a car. But what would be the problem if the state said, well, these are so good, we're not going to let people drive their car, the car is going to drive itself?
Because it wouldn't be fun. I love driving.
It'll happen.
I love driving. I have no interest at all in a driverless car. I can't imagine anything more terrible. But to go back to the God machine, which is not my creation, so I don't have to live with the consequences, I wouldn't trust it an inch. And if it was as hyper-intelligent as it would have to be, to read everybody's thoughts in a millisecond, quick enough to be able to change their minds, what machine like that would ever give up that power? What machine like that would ever... part of Julian's example, which we haven't discussed, is that he imagines that we adults will be able to voluntarily sign up to this machine. So they wouldn't have to be plugged into it if they didn't want to be. But once they were plugged in, then it would effectively have denied them freedom, and that their future character, all of our characters, we build ourselves from the decisions that we make. We are all a product of our past decisions. They form our character, they make us the sort of people we are. I'm the sort of people who likes driving cars, who enjoys, unfortunately, this is apple juice, or tea, not whiskey, but if it were whiskey, I would be enjoying it even more. All of these decisions to acquire tastes, habits, are what makes me the individual that I am. Allow a machine the power to control even a part of your decision-making. And of course, you no longer learn from your mistakes because it won't let you make moral mistakes. And you become the creature of that machine. So even if,
this is nonsense,
Julian,
John.
So
It's complete. I mean, I know.
it would be kind of you to let me finish the
but
thought,
you're going
and
on
then
for
you
so
can.
long. That's why I have to cut
Don't worry, you will have your 5 minutes.
Your car does not allow you to skid now. You don't have the freedom to skid.
Well, that's not.
That's an anti-brake lock system.
No, that's not true.
You don't
actually.
have it. You don't have the
I
choice.
can switch the traction control off in my car, and I do because it's more fun without it. And I don't want
You
the
shouldn't
fun.
trust it.
I
Who
don't
knows
want.
whether it's making the right
well,
decision? You shouldn't trust those machines.
Your car
mate.
wouldn't trust you because you're a crap driver, but it certainly trusts me. But
I never realised you were such a Luddite.
But to get back slightly to the point, this God machine would have effectively taken over our minds and our personalities. And anybody who would trust a machine that intelligent to ever let us go again, it wouldn't, and B, we wouldn't be the people who would want to be let go because we wouldn't have noticed anything. It changes our mind without us knowing our mind has been changed. So if you plug yourself into the machine for a year and then you unplug yourself and you're asked, do you want to go back in again? You would say, well, why not? It hasn't made any difference, you know. I've done everything I wanted to do, so what's the problem? But, of course, you don't know what you would have wanted to do that it would have stopped you doing. It's a nice example, but it seems to me too much of a surrender to a sort of totalitarian nightmare of the brave new world sort. And I am skeptical about its utility. If it is as voluntary as Julian implies that it would be, namely that only competent adults, children might be compulsorily plugged in, but competent adults would have to choose whether to be plugged in. I don't think any sane, competent adults would allow themselves to be plugged in, but of course if they had, they'll never have a motive to be unplugged again. So it is basically selling yourself into slavery. It may be a benign slavery, but I doubt it.
Professor Savalescu, I believe you have to comment on this.
Well, I think it's important. I mean, many very respectable scientists and philosophers believe that free will does not exist at all. Now, I'm inclined to think that we do have free will, but I think it's much smaller than you think it is. I mean, John's sort of going on about totalitarian machines controlling your actions. Your actions are determined by influences outside of your control every single day. If you put a human eye above a tin for coffee money, it makes people more honest. Okay?
If you put a photograph of a human eye above it,
or even
if
three
you actually
dots.
put the eye, you'd have some problem with the owner of the eye.
Even 3 dots will make you more honest than you would be if they weren't there. If you're hungry, you're more severe in your judgments. As a judge, you're more likely to imprison people for longer. If your desk is dirty, you're more likely to be severe as a judge. So there are so many factors that influence our judgments, including the actions of other people, society, and so on. So this idea that we're this great free agent choosing whether many people who commit these sorts of violent crimes, psychopaths, there's a strong argument that a lot of this is genetically determined, genetically disposed. So it's not as if they just choose, freely to kill someone. It's largely out of their hands. How much out of their hands, we don't know. But I think this appeal to freedom is highly overrated.
Professor Rakic, I would like to hear your opinion on God-machine experiments.
Well, I wouldn't say that the God machine necessarily takes away our freedom because most of us will not develop thoughts that will be subject to intervention of the God machine. So criminal thoughts will be sanctioned or will be abolished by the God machine. So I wouldn't actually even call it the God machine, because God, Christian God, Jewish, Muslim God, is the God that leaves us the freedom to sin, leaves the freedom to sin to everyone. So I would perhaps rather call it, but I'm aware that that would be a very unpopular term, so I would propose something else, a police machine, but okay, that's, but the machine, it's not, the God machine, I think, is a term that should be, I would prefer a different term, actually. But I wouldn't say that it endangers our freedom if it only intervenes when we develop criminal thoughts.
If it does, but with respect, you will never know that, because it will change your mind without you noticing it. So you'll never know the extent to which it may or may not have intervened in your life. It's like censorship. I am against censorship. If you allow a censor, somebody who stops the printing or the publication or the putting on television or on radio of ideas that it judges too dangerous for citizens to be exposed to, and you can brief the censors, it can be a machine, it can be a person, you can give them a remit, you can give them instructions to only censor the really naughty things, the really things that would be corrupting for us to see. But once you have censorship, you never know what you're not being allowed to see.
Well,
And so you never know whether the censor is functioning in the way that it is supposed to function. Once you sell yourself down that river of censorship, of allowing somebody to intervene between you and your freedom, whether it's freedom to read or to be exposed to ideas, or whether it's freedom to decide, you never know anymore. You've abdicated power once and for all. So my reasons for being opposed to censorship: free citizens in a free country are entitled to know what there is to be known.
okay, I mean, this is a great example. I think it's a real open question whether the free access to hardcore pornography on the internet is better or worse for people, and indeed whether it's ruining our children's lives. I don't think that there's a straightforward freedom right to access hardcore pornography on the internet. I think it should be an open question whether we impose greater constraints. But let me ask you then, so you've heard this God machine. Let's say it does work perfectly. It's not going to change, it's not going to be used for other purposes. It's just there. And we have, as a society, a choice whether to implement this to affect everyone in our society. Hands up those of you who would prefer to prevent terrorism and murder by the use of the God machine. Anyone?
Yep.
There are some rational people out there. For the rest, they need cognitive and moral.
And if you remind those rational people that you've already...
They're all people who would like to enhance God, so to create a God machine, which is an enhanced God.
and if we now
Which is not the
run the vote again, having reminded people that the question has been begged, because he's assumed that just those things that we would all agree ought to be able to be controlled would be controlled.
But who will guard the guardian?
Thank you.
That's a question.
And who should decide what qualities people ought to have? Anyone?
Well, I would. That's a question I wouldn't be able to answer. Julian will perhaps answer it. But I see another problem. Not the problem John mentioned, but another problem with freedom and the God machine, that we learn from our moral mistakes. We suffer consequences when we do something immoral. If we do not even develop an immoral thought, we might have a problem to develop our moral personality, because we do not learn from our moral mistakes. So that might be...
Absolutely.
But the problems that John raises, I personally do not see as the problem. Perhaps the one I mentioned now, but yeah.
So how do you decide what qualities to aim for? again, I make this point, and gets back to your point about who guards the guardians. Today, we have guardians, and we are the guardians of the guardians. We decide whether there's a death penalty. We decide how long, what to imprison people for. We decide what sort of anti-terrorism measures to employ. We're making these decisions all the time. Likewise, we're making decisions about what kind of moral values we want our children to have, our society to have. Now, the question is not, can we avoid this? The question is, what should we really be aiming for? And it's my claim that we should aim for an ethic that promotes the values of justice, tolerance, respect for human equality, a sense of altruism and willingness to cooperate and make small self-sacrifices for the benefit of others. These sorts of values, I think, are important. Now, you can disagree with them and we can have a discussion, but you can't escape this. This is the sort of thing that will be instilled in society anyway, and it's not clear to me that we have the best set of values now, and it's not clear to me that we're aiming for enhancing, through social means, the right
And it
sorts
never
of
will be clear to you or to me whether we have the best set of values. That's why they have to be constantly revisable, and that's why we need to be aware of the decisions that are being made, and we need to learn, as Boyne rightly said, from our mistakes. If we can't learn from our mistakes, we don't even know that there are mistakes. The God machine will prevent you even thinking that what you've done was a mistake.
This was a hypothetical example. If you think that learning from your mistake is important, then people will differ from that in that,
If
and
you're
maybe you better enhance that.
If you're telling us you chose a very bad example, I would agree with you.
So,
But this is a reply, actually. I don't know if anyone noticed that, but what you said now, to the experience of learning, what you just said now.
No, I mean, this was a point, this example was just to show that freedom has a limited, not unlimited value, as John thinks it has. Freedom to do certain things is not the sort of thing that we need. Now, what we actually decide in the near future to enhance is a question of great significance and a question that we have to have an answer to. Now, some people say to me, look, you should just be tolerant of everyone. Well, people differ in the degrees to which they're tolerant, and you can change that. You can change the ability of their ability to learn from their mistakes or their crimes and so on. So you can change that. The question is, and this is the same for all technology, with the power to change things, with technological power comes responsibility to make a decision. To choose to do nothing, to leave the status quo, is now something you are responsible for, and the consequences of that. Now, you can't absolve yourself of responsibility, sadly, and we face difficult decisions whatever we decide to do.
but would many of us be really motivated to reach out for moral enhancement, having in mind that in modern society, people with high moral standards, strong empathy, and intense will to cooperate are often abused?
Okay, so this is a good example that moral enhancement needs to be a wide concept with many different dimensions. Okay, it's not the Christian doctrine of turn the other cheek. Okay, if you turn the other cheek constantly, you will be exploited. So that isn't a moral enhancement, as John said at the beginning. If it's not good for you, it's not an enhancement. If it doesn't promote a moral outcome, it's not a moral enhancement. So if it's the case that, being too altruistic will lead to exploitation and harm to you, then don't increase altruism. But there will be, as John says, cognitive enhancement is a very important aspect. What other things are in the mix, I think is, we can study that and look at what sorts of things will deal with the problems that we face today. I don't know what the correct level of empathy is. I don't know what the correct level of cooperativeness is. We gave us just some examples, but what I do know is we should be trying to answer those questions systematically and not just sticking our head in the sand like ostriches and saying, human beings, they're good enough, or we shouldn't use medicine or science to change human beings.
I know that Julian will agree with me that I've never suggested anything like that. In fact, our views are very similar. We both believe strongly that our world and ourselves face huge dangers, possibly insoluble dangers. We both agree, I think, that we need to be open to new and radical solutions to those dangers and safeguards against them. We disagree over a small corner of the methodologies for doing that. But I think it's important to emphasize this. I think the range of our agreement, both about the problems facing us and about the types of solutions that we need to find to those problems, is enormous. The agreement is enormous. We have some small disagreements, quite light-hearted, I hope, about some of the chosen methods. But that's small compared with our agreement, which I think, you've seen that we're quite capable of disagreeing quite strongly with one another, but I think actually the things on which we agree are much more important and much more fundamental. We agree in the nature of the problems we face. We agree about their seriousness. We agree that radical, new, and courageous solutions are required to those problems. We have some disagreements about the respective merits of some of those possible solutions. But we're also agreed about something very important, and that is that the search for those solutions has to go on. I'm not against looking for methods of moral enhancement. I just don't think we've found any promising ones yet. But when and if I do think we've found promising ones, I will support them in the way that I support 90% of what Julian also supports in terms of human enhancement, in terms of making our world a better and a safer place for all of us, and preparing for a future which is going to be much, much more difficult than the past.
Thank you, everyone. We are running out of time, so we have 10 minutes for audience questions. Please introduce yourself. In English, and ask a question in English.
I'm Nenad Nešić, a student of philosophy here. Okay, so you said that if we don't have a right to fail, if we don't have a right to make a moral mistake, we wouldn't learn. But why do we have to learn if we can't make a mistake? I mean, the point of learning is to stop making mistakes.
This is a question for Professor Harris.
Yes.
Yes. Well, what constitutes a mistake is a movable feast. Mistakes aren't necessarily mistakes once and for all. Many things that were regarded as mistakes in the past are no longer regarded as mistakes. So we don't want to mortgage our futures to a particular approach to our problems. We need to keep an open mind and open abilities. So what worries me is I think it's naive to think that we can eradicate mistakes. It would be nice, but I think our conception of what will constitute a mistake will change, has changed over time. Many people were very, very sanguine, very complacent about the introduction of the motor car. And much as I love driving, it's a very mixed blessing. And I can also confidently predict that there will be no internal combustion engine-powered cars in the future, much as I'm a petrol head and love them. So, yes, if we could be sure that we would never, in the future, ever make any mistakes, and we could be very clear about what constitutes a mistake, that would be wonderful. I just have no confidence that we can make those discriminations either now or in the future with sufficient reliability to sign up to something like the God machine or its perhaps more realistic equivalent.
Can I just say something on this?
Of course.
The question was a very good one, and the stakes have changed because some mistakes today will be so catastrophic there'll be no learning from them. To take the example that John gave of publishing the way to engineer an infectious version of bird flu. Now, it's always served us well to have scientific freedom to publish everything and make it widely available. It's not clear to me that when the mistake from that at the hands of people today intentionally creating pandemics killing 20 million people is that we shouldn't restrict that information to people who have a security clearance, which already does happen in the employment of people in highly infectious or dangerous laboratories. So, the mistakes that we can make today because of the power that we have are completely different to the mistakes that we've made through human history that we can afford to learn from. That's the point of this discussion, that we are in a different phase of human existence that we've never been in before. And simply saying, well, scientific freedom, that served us very well in the past, won't necessarily do for the future.
Any more questions?
Hi. Okay, I just wanted to notice that there might be perhaps a paradoxical situation with this God machine, in a way that if we get to the point where we have God machine, we can't talk about ethics anymore and moral because we are becoming machines in a way. Why would we think of ethics how we can do that if we are constantly doing things right? So
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And it's a little bit like this opposition to doping in sport. People say doping in sport will just mean that sport becomes a race between the pharmaceutical companies or, who has the most technology. It's no longer a race between human beings. And I think that is a danger, and that is a reason to ban that kind of doping. But doping that makes a small contribution to performance but leaves a substantial part of the human performance intact isn't the same. So in your case, yes, if machines were making every decision for us, we would just be machines. But in the example that I gave, it only affects a very small part of our behaviour. And I think we can give some things up without losing our fundamental moral dispositions or our nature as autonomous agents. So I think it's a danger what you say, but it's not necessary. It's like this film Gattaca that shows this horrible scenario where genetically selected people have all the rights and the good jobs, and the natural people are discriminated against. Yes, of course that's a possibility. The Nazis used gas to kill people. Yes, gas can be used for good and for bad. How we use it is up to us. And I agree with John that freedom is important, that we need to retain the freedom to make moral decisions. It's not absolute. And I think we have to make decisions about how much of what kinds of things we choose to have.
Thank you. I believe we have one more question. And
I'm professor at University of Belgrade School of Medicine. I have few comments regarding what you said so far. First thing is that I do not believe that radical move will lead to any solution, and I can explain that from the medical standpoint. First of all, both of you mentioned the drug Ritalin, which you used. One of them mentioned for cognitive enhancement, the other one for behavioral enhancement. I'm not a pediatrician, but as I may recall, the drug may have a serious side effects, even leading to the brain cancer.
But it has been used for more than 30 years on children, on tens of thousands of children, the sorts of creatures who cannot consent for themselves. It's a pretty safe drug, safe enough to be prescribed over 30 years to hundreds and thousands of children worldwide. I don't believe you.
Okay, and the second thing is the diagnosis, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it's a diagnosis which many do not accept. It's a diagnosis which came up from the States, and I can tell you that here in Europe, especially in Serbia, many pediatricians actually do not deal with diagnosis. I used to travel many times back and forth from here to States and back and forth, and I was actually surprised when I've seen many kids, US kids actually not crying or not making any problem, any mess in an airplane, and actually I asked parents, how it works. And then I realized actually they're getting antihistaminics. Antihistaminics are drugs which actually you use to avoid allergies but makes you sleepy. So they would give these drugs to the kids to enhance their abilities, not to make a noise so that other people in the airplane can travel safely. The second thing
Can I just respond to I agree with you that attention deficit disorder is not a disease. I think it's been invented to enhance children through the use of Ritalin. In New Zealand, 10% of children have this diagnosis of this disease, attention deficit disorder. Now, I don't believe that suddenly 10% of children in New Zealand have a new disease. It's exactly as you said. But it doesn't mean that it's wrong to prescribe the Ritalin. What's important is whether the Ritalin does more good and whether there are significant risks or not.
There is another drug which actually Professor Rakic mentioned in one of his earliest talks. It was oxytocin. Oxytocin is actually a hormone which is released when mother breastfeeds its kids, and actually it makes you to have more empathy, more understanding, and helps you for binding. But actually the same oxytocin is released during during orgasm, for example, and actually you're going to have stronger binding after that as well. But then how you do explore anything? Why would you travel far away if you have strong bonding to your place, to your person, or anybody else? So I think that actually you should support diversity in a society and let certain people to be entrepreneur and let some other people to do other jobs, not to make all of them and to force them to be bound by oxytocin, by Ritalin, by antihistaminics, or anything else. And I'm saying that as a physician.
Okay, so the oxytocin example is a very good one. As you say, oxytocin is released by breastfeeding, intercourse, touching, and also by some versions of the oral contraceptive pill. So many people are under the influence of oxytocin today, many women, through the contraceptives that they take. You're exactly right that it increases trust and bonding between the mother and the child or between the couple. But it also increases what might be called derogation or disrespect of out-group members. So it has that effect on the in-group, but it has negative effects on attitudes to people who are outside of the group. So is it a moral enhancer? I don't think so. I agree with John, and I agree with you. Its effects are mixed. Here is an example where it has been used, I think, legitimately as a moral enhancer. Psychologists dealing with couples in a dysfunctional marriage who are unable to communicate are trialling this spray as a part of couples therapy to open each of the people up to better communication with each other and engaging in couples therapy. Now, I see nothing wrong, if this was effective, in offering it to people as an option to enhance their marital therapy. So to deny this kind of specific use, I think is you know, it doesn't make any sense. You're correct that we can't have a policy of oxytocin for the population, but if we look at specific examples, we can have progress on moral enhancement.
Honestly, yes and no. Yes and no. Again, it may work, may not work. It depends on your genetic background, since all those hormones should act to the receptor. And if you do not have a receptor for oxytocin, you can give as much as you want. You're not going to produce any effects. You can see that in a case of mothers who would have 2 or 3 kids and would leave father with 3 kids without no reason, and the kids would have like 3 years of age, 2 age of years, and 1 age of a year. And then you realize actually that oxytocin is okay, but actually she may have mutation in the receptor for oxytocin. So your therapy may not work if person does not have a genetic background. Then we are stepping up in a different problem. Are you going to genetically modify people to accept the therapy? And that's totally another field which I wouldn't like to go into it, but I have a few more comments, very quick one. Again, I firmly believe that society will regulate through development of society all these issues without any God machine, since I mean, Romain Rolland said in his novel Collaboration, he said, better love and then suffer than never to love. So without suffering, you would never have all those great poems, which I may never understood, but there are some other people who do. So
I absolutely
excuse
agree.
me.
Let's increase suffering for the sake of
We are
poetry.
running out of time, so if you can ask a question, because we have one more question here.
okay.
I just want to say, you know, every moral decision, everything has to be context specific. You know, is it, as John says, is it wrong to kill? Generally, yes. In some circumstances, no. So it would be crazy if there was a single moral enhancing pill that worked in every circumstance. We're going to have to take into account genetic variation, circumstances, and so on in any decisions that we make about anything.
Next question, please.
So it seems to me that moral enhancement, as you presented, it must be universal in order to function. So this is a part of my question. If it is not universal and not compulsory, how can it work? Because I guess we can assume that those people who would choose to be morally enhanced are already those who are reluctant to act immorally. And if it is universal, you might say it's heaven on earth, but on the other hand, it just could be seen as a way to use our freedom to destroy our freedom, which might be okay for us, like if you commit a suicide, but is it something we can do for the future generations?
So it's never going to be universal. You're never going to do something that affects 7 billion people. So it's, you know, just... let me just get to that. All you'll ever be able to do is change probabilities. You can't attain certainty anywhere in the world. So how might you use this in a way that has some effect, some beneficial effect? Our key political leaders make hugely important decisions. Imagine if Al Gore had got in as president instead of George W. Bush. We may not have a war on terror. We may have a completely different world. Now, it may be that moral enhancement is, or changing the sort of, or influencing the moral environment of the key decisions that are made, or peace negotiations, or whatever, is a way of significantly shifting the probabilities. If we could make progress on Israel-Palestine. These are moral decisions that are made. Now, we already changed the environment to maximise certain outcomes in negotiation or political decision-making. Why should we leave the major decisions up to extrinsic factors like how dirty the desk is or how tired the person is? And these are things that we will develop a science of. Now, if we can't, maybe we can't have any effect on anything. But the point is that we should try. Again, children in developed societies, maybe you can enhance their acquisition of moral skills. That's not going to cure the world's problems, but it might make some progress. You know, we will never get rid of these risks now that we've created them for ourselves. Never. But the best we can do is try to reduce them. And it seems to me this is. Everyone has spent a huge amount of money and time talking about social and political reform. Okay? These are incredibly important, and maybe they'll provide the answers. The point that Ingemar Persson and I have made is we should also look at inside ourselves for the causes of these problems, not because we believe they're going to generate solutions anytime soon, but so significant are the problems that we face today, we should explore every avenue. And I'm personally very pessimistic. I'll leave you with this. Stephen Hawking, the famous physicist, did a poll a number of years ago on asking people what they thought the biggest risks were this century. And at the end, they asked Hawking, what do you think the biggest risks are for the survival of the species? And he said, nuclear war, climate change, natural epidemics, bioterrorism, these sorts of things. And he said, it will take at least 100 years for humans to be able to start to inhabit space, like John suggested, that we will need to ensure the long-term survival of the species. And he said, this is a critical century. Martin Rees, the president of the Royal Society in England, called this our final century. And Hawking finished this interview by saying, in order to survive, perhaps we need to make ourselves wiser, genetically enhance ourselves, to make ourselves wiser and less aggressive. Now, I don't know whether it's going to come by genetic intervention, but it's certainly an issue that people like Stephen Hawking and Martin Rees see as a very important project for us to discuss and pursue. I don't know if we can make ourselves wiser and less aggressive, but I think we should at least research it.
I agree.
Let me, if I just, this is important, if I would like just to add one sentence to this, that we might reach a stage in our evolution at which the survival of our species will not be the most important thing for us. Why
Professor,
should we always believe, as people at one point who are cognitively and morally more developed, that our species should survive at any cost?
Well, not. The answer to that question is because we may be alone in the universe. We may be the only self-conscious, intelligent beings anywhere. And I don't mind about humanity ceasing to exist as long as we replace ourselves with and certainly not with God machines, no, replace ourselves with better evolved, enhanced future generations.
That is also my point.
Yeah.
So I'm not propagating obliteration of all life. No.
Thank you. One quick question, a lady in the first row.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, but far from it.
Actually, this is not my own question, but I would like to ask that question, but each of you...
We don't have that much time.
No, okay. Great Russian writer Dostoevsky asked a question. I think it happened during a funeral of another Russian poet, Pushkin. And now I would like that to ask you a question. He's asked in such a way. Imagine that the doom of the whole mankind depends just from one human. You understand? So, do we have right, or do you have right, to kill that just one human, because it depends, the doom of the whole mankind depends just from one. What would be your own choice?
A clear case of self-defense.
So he says yes. I mean, it's important to recognise that the United States and the coalition of the willing are doing not just one innocent child, but many hundreds of thousands of people on the chance that they will protect the future of the world. So, you know, the reality is that, but the reality is, if it were the case that the whole of the world was at stake, yes, that's what we should do.
Professor Akis?
The ontological view might be that we should not do it, but if the whole of humanity depends on that, I would rather save the whole of humanity. I'd ask someone else to kill that particular person and save humanity, if you ask me.
What cowardice.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your wonderful audience.